I think it'd be very helpful to get to the bottom of the facts, to follow the law, to get us there. That would include the whistleblower as well as the transcript of the conversation.
And if they don't?
Well, that'll be up to the House to decide how to proceed. But it's very much, I believe, in the public interest to get this resolved and be able to move on.
What I'd like to do is, I don't know anything about it other than what you folks have reported. And since I listen to a lot of whistleblowers, I would invite the whistleblower to come and talk to me.
Do you want the whistleblower complaint to be turned over to Congress?
I would like to have the whistleblower come and talk to me so we know what his story is. I don't want to hear it secondhand.
You just heard from two key Republican senators there, Mitt Romney first and then just there Chuck Grassley, not exactly carrying the president's water on the Ukraine whistleblower story or, for that matter, on keeping President Trump away from impeachment. Another powerful voice we heard from today, John Lewis. He's the civil rights icon turned congressman, often referred to as the conscience of the House. Well, he had also opposed impeachment. That was until today.
The future of our democracy is at stake. There come a time when you have to be moved by the spirit of history to take action to protect and preserve the integrity of our nation. I truly believe, the time to begin impeachment proceedings against this president has come.
Now, as we mentioned, the next big event when it comes to the impeachment path, it comes this Thursday. That's when the acting director of national intelligence will testify publicly before the House Intelligence Committee. Now, this morning, before Pelosi's announcement, which happened right about 5 o'clock, I spoke with a member of that Intelligence Committee, the all-important one, New York's Sean Patrick Maloney. We try to give our audience the whole backdrop as to where we stand right now on this, but with a fire hose of news that comes down, you can't even fault folks for saying, after 3 years, this seems just like the latest, I don't know what you want to call it. Can you give, from your perspective, the most disturbing part of this story with what we already know, let alone are trying to get additional information on?
Right. Well, it's extremely serious what's being alleged, and people should realize that is entirely separate from the 2016 election or from the Bob Mueller investigation. What we're talking about are events that happened literally within the last few weeks. And what we know, because the White House has largely confirmed it, is that it appears that the President of the United States threatened the withdrawal of military aid to a country that is right now being invaded by the Russians and linked it to the leadership of that country being willing to help him smear a political opponent. That's about as serious a thing as I've ever heard an American president being accused of. And if it's true, it warrants impeachment.
You met with the Inspector General last week, and this Thursday you're going to have, as I mentioned, another important meeting. What are you looking for? I mean, some have said that there's an existence of an audio tape. Some have said a transcript would be sufficient. Others people say they want the full whistleblower report. For you, what is unacceptable if you don't get X? What do you need to see or hear this Thursday? Because I understand it, this isn't an optional part on the part of the administration. This is codified into law or regulation. You or do this.
Right. Well, let me make it really simple. If we don't see the full whistleblower complaint and we don't see any transcript and or audio recordings of these phone calls this week, I'm going to call for a full impeachment inquiry in the House. Period. Full stop. The law is crystal clear. Congress should have had this whistleblower complaint more than 2 weeks ago. The Inspector General went to the Office of Director of National Intelligence, as the statute requires, said this complaint is credible and that it's an urgent concern. Those are defined terms under the law. And the DNI, the Director of National Intelligence, has one duty, which is to send it to Congress. He can comment on it. That's provided for in the statute, but there's no other excuse for withholding it. And yet for more than 2 weeks, they've sat on this, and it's outrageous. We need to see that whistleblower complaint. We need to see it immediately, and we need to understand exactly what was said by the President of the United States in those phone calls with the President of Ukraine. Because remember, the President has himself acknowledged raising the issue of corruption, linking it to Joe Biden, and linking it to U.S. assistance to that country, which basically is the quid pro quo. So I think it's extremely serious. And I want people to know that I have been, as I think you understand, reluctant to call for a full-blown impeachment inquiry in the House. I think it should be the last step, not the first step. But the President is leaving us no choice if by the end of this week we've not seen both the whistleblower complaint and the transcript or audio recordings of those phone calls. The people deserve answers on this.
And when you hear words like coercion, extortion, bribery, and they're not even far-fetched potentially as they attach to this, it's also coupled, as I understand it, Congressman, this wasn't the president who just said, hey, get on the Ukrainian premier on the phone. You had apparently the chief of staff, the secretaries of defense, state, and treasury potentially involved. I mean, talk about wide-ranging here. A whole bunch of folks potentially could be implicated in this.
I think a lot of people have tough questions to answer, but this one's on the president first and foremost. And don't forget, he was also using a private citizen, Rudy Giuliani, to deliver this message. And what we know about that message is it sounds more like a mob boss than a president of the United States. I mean, this is an ally engaged in a shooting war with the Russians. They've had Crimea annexed. They have Russian forces in the eastern part of their country right now. You're talking about almost $400 million in military aid. I'll bet you that's larger than the entire defense budget of Ukraine, or darn close. And the President of the United States held it up for months while he was demanding that the President of that country, newly elected by the way, that the President of that country knuckle under to engage in some smear campaign of a political opponent back here in the United States. You know, I hear myself saying that. It gives me no pleasure to say that. This is not a day for celebration. You know, it breaks my heart that an American president would engage in that kind of conduct. So we need to find out what the facts are. And that starts with a whistleblower complaint, which should have come up a couple of weeks ago. And it starts with the transcript of those phone calls to clear this up. If we don't get that by the end of the week, I'm supporting an impeachment inquiry.
And I want to remind everybody the congressman's context here, because he was elected when President Obama was still there, but he also served under President Clinton in the White House. Give an idea, because I just saw Governor Kasich out of Ohio say, if this had happened under Clinton or Obama, heads would have exploded. And he said across party lines on the Hill. I assume you agree with that, but moreover, are you hearing anything to give you any reason to think that Republicans are saying, wait a minute, this is a bridge too far?
Look, that's on them. You're going to have to ask them at what points their conscience and their patriotism catches up with their tribal loyalty to one man named Donald Trump. I don't know what the hell this has to do with being a Republican or being a conservative. Why anyone would excuse this conduct by a Democrat or a Republican, any president of the United States, using U.S. military assistance to an ally in desperate need as leverage to gin up some smear against a political opponent. You bet that warrants an impeachment inquiry, and if the facts are borne out, if that's proven true, it merits impeachment and removal from office. And I don't think you'll see Republicans lining up at the front of that line, but if those facts are true, well, gosh, I sure hope we'd see some before the vote, because ultimately this is about something much bigger than one president or one party. This is about the United States Constitution. It's about the rule of law. It's about what we stand for in the world. It's about what we're going to put up with in our politics from anybody. And we deserve better than this. And so let's get the facts immediately and go from there.
Finally, for folks who may not recognize the backdrop behind you, it's, I think apropos, given we're talking about potentially self-dealing yet again here. You're talking about a building behind you that recognized self-sacrifice, Purple Heart Museum. Talk about what went on today and also the significance, especially of those who sacrificed. And I encourage people to go there if they haven't, because it's an amazing display.
Right. Well, we're at the Purple Heart Hall of Honor here in New Windsor, New York. This is where we honor our wounded warriors who paid a terrible price for their commitment to the rule of law, to our Constitution. It's an award that no one wants, but people should be very proud of earning. And this is it. This is the place in the United States where we honor those who've been awarded and earned the Purple Heart. What we're announcing, which is exciting, is that Congress will be minting a U.S. commemorative coin honoring all recipients of the Purple Heart. It'll be minted right here at West Point in the Hudson Valley. We have a mint right down the road. And we'll be selling those as early as 2021. And the proceeds, after the cost to the taxpayers, will come right back here to the Hall of Honor so that we can expand its mission, so we can expand the roles of who is remembered here, because we don't have any complete accounting of who's earned the Purple Heart throughout American history. And we can continue this important work of honoring the true heroes who understood that the United States was bigger than any one of us, and it was worth fighting for, and even paying the ultimate sacrifice for. And it's that sense of sacrifice and duty that I think puts this other news in context. We all have a responsibility that's bigger than ourselves. The President sure does. I do. We all do. And that's what I'm thinking about as I go back to Washington.
Good enough, Congressman, and good luck on Thursday. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Richard.
Okay. While we were talking earlier, the Republicans gave a response. Remember, Speaker Pelosi at 5 o'clock announced that they will pursue an impeachment inquiry this Thursday. They've demanded certain information to be turned over, but those are the stakes. Well, there's been a Republican response, and I want to take the minority leader in the House, Kevin McCarthy, a Republican from California, this small portion of what he had to say just a few minutes ago.
But she cannot change the laws of this Congress. She cannot unilaterally decide we're in an impeachment inquiry. What she said today made no difference of what's been going on. It's no different than what Nadler's been trying to do. It's time to put the public before politics.
Now, I bring you back in, Andrew. I mean, and I'll ask the Congresswoman this. Hopefully, they're right now between meetings, quorum, etc. It's called dancing in television. But there was a tipping point. There's a lot of lawmakers, she being one of them, that are in districts that historically voted, sometimes even Republican, but certainly were toss-up districts. Politically, at least before this last incident, only a third of Americans really wanted impeachment. Now, maybe things have changed. Democrats believe that they can convince us, but if people can just put their partisan blinders to the side, this story, especially in context of the Russian developments and where the Mueller probe was when this all went down, is so jaw-dropping, the arrogance to try it, let alone the impropriety and the abuse of power, which is really, when you talk article of its impeachment, this fits right into the sweet spot of it. I don't think they had a choice. They had to do it.
I think you're right. And I think what Minority Leader McCarthy misses there, because I've heard this from others trying to lump the Mueller investigation and the 2016 stuff into this, what he's missing is that these are separate and distinct events. One was relitigating the 2016 election to a certain degree. The actions now by the House moving towards impeachment is to try to protect the 2020 election, because right now it's Donald Trump apparently looking for outside help to interfere in the next election.
And just to put a little point of clarity, there was arguments back and forth how much the Russians were guided by the Trump campaign team, how much they were involved. This was directly at the behest of the president. By reporting now, he got his chief of staff involved, he got his secretary of defense, of state, and of treasury involved to facilitate this. And he sent his own personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to go over to the Ukraine to try and get more dirt. This was not some bot running out of Moscow. This was the president using our tax dollars to say, you give me dirt or I won't give you this. Now, even if it's not a stated quid pro quo, he acknowledged this was what he wanted, and he believes he had the right to do it. So that is what this fight will be about. Okay. We, of course, will break in with the Congresswoman, assuming we can get her. But in the next time when we come back, it's not like today was a slow news day. We had the UN after all. The 73-year-old president of ours, Donald Trump, he decided to take a cheap shot at a 16-year-old Greta Thunberg. And she decided to hit back. The lowlights from the UN straight ahead.